All right, deep divers, buckle up.
Buckle up indeed.
We're diving into the heart of India's democracy,
The heart of it.
the executive branch.
A political thriller.
You've specifically asked about this
You asked for it.
and provided the textbook chapter, Indian Constitution at Work.
A fantastic resource.
So we're going beyond those basic Google search results today.
Way beyond.
Get ready for some aha moments
I love those aha moments.
as we unpack how power really flows in this system.
It's like a political thriller, right?
It is.
We're not just looking at dry laws on paper,
Right.
but how decisions that affect over 1 billion people
Over 1 billion.
are actually made.
Okay, so before we get to the drama,
Before the drama,
I'm picturing you with your professor hat on,
I do love a good professor hat.
about to give us a crash course on the executive branch.
The executive branch it is.
I have to admit, I sometimes mix that up with the judicial branch.
Happens to the best of us.
What's the easiest way to remember which is which?
Imagine a company.
Okay, a company.
Yeah, the executive branch is like the CEO,
A CEO, okay.
making the big calls.
Got it.
They're the ones responsible for running the show,
They're running it.
setting the
It's
strategy,
in the strategy.
and making sure things happen.
Making it happen.
In a country like India,
Okay.
that's your prime minister and their team.
So the prime minister's calling the shots.
They're calling the shots.
But here's a curveball. Our source mentions different countries structure this whole executive branch thing
Well, it's different everywhere.
in totally different ways.
Totally different.
They even mention the US, Canada, France, and Japan.
Some pretty diverse places.
I mean, those are some pretty diverse places.
They are.
Why such variety?
It's all about how a country decides to slice the power pie.
The power pie, I like that.
Think of it like choosing a team captain
Okay.
versus having a group of co-captains.
Just co-captain.
Each approach comes with its own strengths and weaknesses.
Right. Makes sense.
Some countries, like the U.S.,
US, okay.
with the presidential system,
Yeah, presidential.
where the president holds a lot of individual power.
A lot of power in one person.
Others, like India,
Our focus today,
opted for a parliamentary system,
spreading the wealth.
spreading the authority out a bit more.
So it's like different operating systems for governments.
You could say that.
India chose the parliamentary route.
They did.
I know they were under British rule for quite a while.
For quite a while, yes.
And the textbook mentions something called the Government of India Acts of 1919 and 1935.
Very important.
Was that a factor?
Absolutely. It's like learning to ride a bike with training wheels.
Training wheels.
Those acts gave Indians a taste of self-governance,
A taste.
but within that parliamentary framework.
Within that framework.
By the time they were drafting their own constitution,
Their own constitution.
that model was familiar.
Familiar.
And importantly, it addressed some key concerns.
So no system is born in a vacuum.
Not at all.
It's shaped by history and context.
Absolutely.
Give us the inside scoop.
The inside scoop.
What were those big concerns that made the parliamentary system so appealing to India's founders?
One word. Accountability.
Accountability, okay?
They'd seen firsthand how unchecked power could go wrong,
Power can be dangerous
and they were determined to prevent that in their own democracy.
in their own democracy.
The parliamentary system,
Okay.
with its emphasis on making the executive answerable to the people's elected representatives,
Answerable to the people.
really appealed to them.
So it's like having a direct line from the citizens to the prime minister's office.
In a way, yes.
But doesn't that mean the prime minister could get the boot pretty easily if they aren't popular?
You've got it.
Wow.
It's a high-stakes game.
High stakes indeed.
But here's another crucial point.
Okay, another point.
India's founders were also wary of putting too much power in the hands of one person,
Too much power, right?
like in a presidential system.
I see.
They wanted to avoid the whole personality cult thing
Personality cult.
and keep power distributed.
So they spread the love a bit.
Spread the love.
Power sharing style.
Exactly.
But in that setup, where does the president fit in?
Good question.
Isn't the president like the face of India on those fancy stamps and coins?
The face of India?
A lot of people think of the president as a figurehead in a parliamentary system.
A figurehead.
Is that accurate for India?
That's a common misconception.
A misconception.
While the prime minister is definitely the one running the daily show,
A daily show.
the president isn't just there for ribbon cuttings.
Not just ribbon cuttings.
They have some sneaky, powerful moves up their sleeve,
Sneaky, powerful moves.
especially when things get politically dicey.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
I thought you might find this interesting.
I'm picturing some serious behind-the-scenes maneuvering.
You could say that?
Spill the tea.
Let's spill the tea.
What kind of power are we talking about here?
Well, let's start with the obvious.
Okay, the obvious.
They're the head of state,
Head of state.
the symbolic embodiment of India on the world stage.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think state dinners,
State dinners.
receiving foreign dignitaries, that kind of thing.
Got it.
But don't let the pomp and ceremony fool you.
Don't be fooled.
The president has some concrete powers,
Concrete powers.
and they come into play at crucial moments.
All right, so it's not just about looking dignified and giving speeches.
It's more than that.
There's real decision-making happening.
Real decision-making.
Imagine this.
Okay, I'm imagining
Election season,
election season.
and the results are in.
The results are in.
A hung parliament.
Oh,
No clear winner.
political chaos, everyone for themselves.
It happens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the president's role gets really interesting
Thanks, you're good.
in those situations.
Those tricky situations.
They get to decide who has the best shot at forming a stable government.
Who gets to be in charge?
It's not just about which party got the most votes,
Right.
but who can actually wrangle enough support to govern effectively.
That's a huge responsibility, especially in a country as diverse and complex as India.
Absolutely.
Didn't that happen after the 1989 election?
Good memory. It was a political nail-biter.
It sounds like it.
No single party got a majority.
So then what happened?
So the president had to step in,
And be the decider,
assess the alliances,
right?
and make a judgment call.
High-stakes poker, political edition.
You could say that.
That's way more power than I initially realized.
It's more than meets the eye.
But what about day-to-day governing?
Day to day.
Does the president have any say in what goes on?
Don't forget the Council of Ministers,
The Council of
the
Ministers.
Prime Minister's inner circle.
The inner circle.
The president might be bound to act on their advice,
Bound to act.
but they can ask them to hit the pause button
The pause button.
to reconsider their decisions.
Interesting. So the president gets to be the voice of reason,
Yeah, what?
tapping the brakes when things get heated.
Exact.
I bet the prime minister just loves that.
Let's just say it adds another layer of complexity to their relationship.
I bet.
And speaking of the prime minister,
All right, the prime minister.
that's who we need to talk about next.
Okay, on to the prime minister.
They might not have the final say on everything,
Not the final say.
but they're definitely the one calling most of the shots.
It's like in a company, right?
Like a company
The CEO sets the vision,
sets the vision.
but they still have a board of directors to answer to.
You've got to answer to someone.
The prime minister has the Lok Sabha.
That's right.
If I'm remembering my Indian politics correctly,
You are.
our textbook, Indian Constitution at Work, really highlights that connection.
It's the golden rule of India's parliamentary system.
The golden rule.
The prime minister must have the support of the majority of the Lok Sabha.
It's like that old saying, it's lonely at the top.
They're very lonely.
No kidding. But that support isn't just about popularity, right?
Popularity contests only get you so far.
Right.
It actually translates into real power.
You're catching on.
Remember how the president gets to appoint the prime minister?
They appoint the prime minister, but
One reality, that decision hinges on who commands the majority in the Lok Sabha.
it's all about the numbers.
And once the prime minister is in place,
They're in
they get to handpick their own team,
their own A-team.
the Council of Ministers.
Okay, so it's a bit like fantasy football, drafting your A-team of ministers.
I like that analogy.
But things get interesting when no one has a clear majority, right?
Yeah.
Our source mentioned this whole rise of coalition governments in India,
Coalitions can get messy.
especially after 1989.
Things change.
I have a feeling those coalition situations make the prime minister's job a whole lot harder.
Imagine trying to herd cats,
Herd cats, wow.
and you'll get a sense of it.
That's a lot of cats.
Coalitions mean power sharing,
Okay,
compromise,
compromise.
and a whole lot of negotiation.
So much negotiation.
The prime minister has to keep everyone on the same page,
How do they even do that?
even if they have different priorities and ideologies.
Talk about walking a tightrope.
It's a balancing act for sure.
Does that mean the prime minister has less power in a coalition government
It's definitely different.
compared to when a single party's calling all the shots?
It's a trade-off.
A trade-off.
On the one hand,
Okay.
they have to be more collaborative and less autocratic.
Right.
Our source mentions that the president's role also gets more interesting in these scenarios,
Right.
sometimes becoming a power broker in their own right.
We talked about that earlier.
It can get very interesting.
The president stepping in when it's a hung parliament.
Exactly.
So coalitions shake things up at all levels.
They do.
What about the whole Council of Ministers situation?
What about it?
Is that a free-for-all in a coalition?
It can feel like that sometimes.
With every party demanding those coveted ministerial positions.
You're not wrong to imagine some intense bargaining going on.
I bet.
The council can become pretty bloated in those situations.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Our source actually mentions a specific example, the 91st Amendment Act of 2003.
Okay, I have to build.
Like a minute.
When I hear 91st Amendment, my eyes start to glaze over a bit.
It happens.
Give me the non-legal jargon version.
The simple version.
Why was this amendment such a big deal?
Think of it as putting a cap on the guest list for a party.
A party, okay.
Before this amendment,
Before the party.
there were no real limits on how many ministers the prime minister could appoint.
More ministers, more power, right?
You would think so.
I'm guessing that led to some pretty packed cabinet meetings.
It was getting out of hand.
What was the downside of having so many ministers?
Well, apart from the logistical nightmare of getting everyone in the same room,
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
it could get ridiculously expensive.
The budget.
Plus, it often led to inefficient decision-making,
Too many voices.
and sometimes even political horse trading.
Just to keep everyone happy.
Exactly.
So it was a recipe for gridlock and ballooning budgets.
It wasn't pretty.
No wonder they decided to streamline things.
And that's where the 91st Amendment came in?
The 91st Amendment to the rescue.
It basically said, enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
It limited the Council of Ministers to 15% of the size of the Lake Saba,
So a smaller party.
bringing some much-needed sanity to the system.
Sounds like a win for taxpayers and for anyone who values efficiency in government.
A win for everyone.
But all this talk about ministers and amendments makes me realize
What's that?
we've been neglecting a vital part of the story.
We have.
The people who actually make all those policies a reality.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Next time, we're trading in our politician hats for some serious bureaucratic headwear.
Now that's a look.
Who knew a deep dive into the Indian government could be so exciting?
It's full of surprises.
All right, deep divers, we're back.
Back for more.
The grand finale
The grand finale.
of our Indian executive branch saga.
It's been quite a journey.
We've seen the president flexing their behind-the-scenes power
The sneaky powers.
and the prime minister navigating the wild world of coalitions.
hurting those cats.
Now,
Now,
let's shine the spotlight
the spotlight,
on the engine room of it all,
the engine room,
the bureaucracy.
the unsung heroes.
They are kind of the unsung heroes, aren't they?
They really are.
Think of it this way.
Okay, I'm thinking.
The bureaucracy is like the nervous system of a government.
A nervous system.
It takes all those big ideas,
The big ideas.
those promises politicians make,
Right.
and translates them into actual tangible things that impact people's lives
Real world stuff.
every single day.
Every single
Their
day.
textbook,
Our trusty textbook.
Indian Constitution at Work,
A good one.
really emphasizes that point.
It does.
Okay, that's a way better analogy than just saying they push paper.
So much more than pushing paper.
So they're the ones making sure the trains run on time.
One of the many things, yes.
The schools have teachers,
Important job.
and the potholes hopefully get filled.
Let's hope so.
From the moment you apply for a driver's license
Okay.
to the way your taxes fund public services,
All right.
the bureaucracy is involved.
They're everywhere.
And here's the kicker.
Okay, what's the kicker?
They're supposed to be politically neutral.
Politically neutral, so they don't really care who's in power.
They shouldn't.
So they're like the ultimate multitaskers.
You could say that.
Switching hats every time a new government comes in,
That's the idea.
but always staying true to the rules of the game.
Ideally, yes.
That sounds like a tough job,
It's not easy.
especially in a democracy as vibrant
Vibrant is a good word for it.
and, let's face it, sometimes chaotic as India.
You've hit on a crucial point.
I did.
That neutrality is essential for a democracy to function.
I can see that.
You need that continuity,
Right.
that assurance that things won't fall apart just because there's a change in leadership.
That makes sense.
But let's be real.
Okay, let's be real.
The bureaucracy, especially in a country as vast and complex as India,
It's a big country.
faces its fair share of challenges.
Yeah, bureaucracy and efficiency don't always go hand in hand, do they?
Not always, no.
Our source definitely hints at some of those potential pitfalls.
There are definitely some pitfalls.
What are some of the big ones when it comes to the Indian bureaucracy?
Well, one issue is the sheer concentration of power.
Too much power.
Bureaucrats, especially those higher up the ladder,
At the top.
can have a lot of influence over decisions that affect people's lives.
Decisions that affect all of us.
And power, as we know, can be a slippery slope.
It's like that saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Words to live by.
But on the other hand, you don't want a bureaucracy that's completely answerable to no one, right?
Accountability is key.
Right.
That's the balancing act.
Finding that balance.
Too much political interference can be just as detrimental.
So it's bad both ways.
If politicians are constantly meddling in the day-to-day functioning of the bureaucracy,
Micromanaging.
it undermines their neutrality and can turn them into tools for partisan interests.
So you need accountability.
Accountability.
But not at the cost of independence.
It's a delicate balance.
Our source mentions that India has been trying to address these challenges.
They have.
Particularly when it comes to making the bureaucracy more representative of India's incredibly diverse population.
Representation matters.
I think they called them reservation policies.
Yes, reservation policies.
The idea being that a more inclusive bureaucracy,
Inclusive.
one that reflects the people it serves,
Right.
is more likely to be responsive and accountable to their needs.
That's the goal.
It's about ensuring that opportunities to serve in the government
Serving the people.
are open to all sections of society,
Right.
including those who have historically been marginalized.
It's like making sure the team running things actually looks like the team they're playing for.
I like that analogy.
Makes sense to me.
It's about fairness.
But even with those efforts,
There's always room for improvement.
there's always room to grow.
Finding that perfect balance is probably an ongoing process.
An ongoing process.
Absolutely.
How do you create a bureaucracy
How do you do it?
that's efficient, transparent, and truly accountable to the people?
The million-dollar question.
That's a question countries around the world are grappling with. Not just India,
A global
a
challenge.
universal head-scratcher.
You could say that.
Well, deep divers, there you have it.
We've reached the end.
We've gone from the president's subtle nudges
Those subtle nudges.
to the prime minister's balancing act,
Balancing act, indeed.
all the way to the unsung heroes of the bureaucracy,
He deserves some credit.
the Indian executive branch.
What a system.
It's a dynamic system full of checks, balances, and those occasional power struggles that make politics so fascinating.
And we wouldn't have it any other way.
And as you continue exploring this topic,
Keep exploring.
here's something our source touched on that I think is worth pondering.
Oh, tell me more.
India's founders were very intentional in designing a system where power is distributed, not concentrated,
to spread that
as
stuff.
India grows and evolves.
It's constantly changing.
Do you think that system is still effectively preventing any one person or group from having too much power?
That's the question, isn't it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't
a
it?
big one.
And on that note, deep divers,
Until next time.
we'll leave you to ponder those deeper implications.
Happy pondering.
Keep those thinking caps on
No, take them off.
and join us next time
That-
as we plunge into another fascinating corner of knowledge.
There's always another adventure.